The rain had started before sunset, soft at first, then heavy enough to turn the dust of the old road into brown puddles that glistened under the flicker of a single lantern. Out in that lonely stretch between the old trading post and the mill stood a small wooden house, half leaning, half surviving, like its owner. A widow lived there, they said, with a little girl who barely spoke. Folks in the nearby village knew the woman kept to herself after her husband's death, selling hand-stitched quilts and jars of pickled vegetables to stay alive. Few ever saw her smile, and fewer ever crossed her porch until that night. He had been riding for hours through the storm, coat soaked, boots caked in mud, searching for a place to rest his horse and dry his hands. The sound of a crying child drifted faintly through the rain, stopping him cold. He followed the voice down the narrow dirt path until the small house appeared through the dark. The windows glowed faintly, smoke curling from the chimney. When he knocked, the door opened just enough for the light to spill over his worn face and trembling fingers. A woman stood there, wrapped in a faded shawl, her eyes tired but alert. "Please stay tonight," she said quietly before he could speak. "My daughter hasn't eaten." Those words cut through the storm louder than thunder. She didn't ask who he was, nor what brought him to her door. Her voice trembled, not from fear, but from desperation. Behind her, the small figure of a child sat by the cold fireplace, clutching a piece of cloth like a doll. The man stepped in slowly, dripping water onto the wooden floor. The air smelled of wet timber and boiled cornmeal, faint but old. It was a home fighting against hunger and time itself. He removed his hat, nodded silently, and looked around the dim room. Everything spoke of quiet struggle. The patched curtains, the chipped cups, the old cradle now empty. He could tell she hadn't expected anyone, but something in her eyes begged him not to leave. He was a stranger, a traveler passing through, yet in that moment he felt something shift deep inside him, something that told him this house held a story heavier than the rain outside. She motioned for him to sit by the fire. "It went out before noon," she said softly, setting a few damp logs into the pit. He helped, crouching beside her, his rough hand steadying hers as the flame struggled to rise. When the fire finally caught, its glow revealed the thin lines of fatigue across her face, and the bruised look of sleepless nights beneath her eyes. She wasn't old, but sorrow had aged her faster than time should allow. The little girl watched them silently, her dark eyes wide, her lips pale. The man offered her a piece of dried bread from his saddlebag, and she took it like it was gold. "You shouldn't be out in this weather," the woman said, her voice faint, but warmer now. "No man rides alone on a night like this unless he's running from something." He looked at the fire and didn't answer. The silence between them said enough. Out there, the rain hammered the roof and the wind howled through the cracks. The house creaked like it was whispering its own fears. Inside, three souls shared a fragile warmth, each hiding something the others couldn't yet see. The traveler's coat hung by the door, dripping onto the floorboards. His horse neighed outside, tied under the eaves. The woman handed him a cup of warm water, apologizing for not having more. He accepted it with quiet gratitude. "It's been hard since the harvest failed," she murmured. "The townsfolk buy less each month. I sold my last quilt yesterday for a handful of coins. I thought it would be enough to buy flour, but the storekeeper said prices went up again." He nodded, feeling the weight of her words. "And your husband?" he asked softly, buried behind the barn. She whispered. "2 winters ago, fever took him before the thaw. Since then, it's just been us." She turned her gaze to her daughter, who had fallen asleep by the fire, clutching her cloth doll. For a moment, the woman's eyes glistened. "I keep thinking I'll leave this place," she said. "But then I remember he built this house with his own hands. Leaving would feel like losing him all over again." The traveler listened, his jaw tightening. He had seen many like her, souls who stayed behind not because they wanted to, but because the land had claimed them. He understood that kind of loyalty, the kind that hurt to keep but hurt worse to break. He reached into his satchel and placed a small wrapped bundle on the table. Inside were salted jerky and a bit of cornmeal. "Take it," he said. "It'll last a few days," she hesitated. "I can't take from a stranger." "You can," he replied. "And you should." For a while, the only sound was the rain easing into a steady drizzle. She looked at him differently now, not as a traveler, but as someone who carried his own burden. "What brings you this way?" she asked quietly. He stared into the fire. "I used to work the mines down near Yuma. Left when the cave-in took half the crew. Been heading north since. Don't much know where I'm going anymore." Something softened in her expression. "Maybe nowhere is the right place to stop," she said. Her words lingered between them, slow and fragile. He didn't know why, but he found himself drawn to her calm, to the quiet dignity she wore even in despair. He looked around at the room again, the faint sketches on the wall, a man's old boots tucked under the chair, the smell of earth and smoke that clung to everything. It wasn't comfort he felt. It was belonging, the kind that sneaks up when you least expect it. He offered to fix the broken shutter flapping outside, and she let him. When he stepped onto the porch, the night air was cold and still. The rain had stopped, leaving a silvery mist that curled around the trees. Somewhere in the distance, a wolf howled. He paused, feeling the eeriness of the night. Something about this place felt strange, like the air itself carried memories too heavy to fade. When he came back inside, the fire burned brighter, casting gold across the walls. The woman was tending to her daughter, laying a thin blanket over her small frame. For the first time that night, he saw her smile faintly, though her eyes still carried shadows. He sat quietly, letting the warmth reach his bones. For a long while, neither spoke. They didn't need to. There was a quiet understanding that both had lost too much and had no one left to tell. Then came a faint knock at the door, soft, hesitant, almost ghost-like. The woman froze. Her eyes darted to the window. "No one comes here after dark," she whispered. He rose slowly, hand instinctively resting near his belt where a revolver usually hung. But he'd pawned it months ago for food. The knocking came again, firmer this time. The little girl stirred in her sleep. The woman's breath quickened. "Don't open it," she said, her voice barely audible. "Please don't." He glanced at her, confused. "Who would it be?" Her lips trembled. "Sometimes he comes back," she whispered. Before he could ask what she meant, the latch turned on its own. The door creaked open, wind rushing in, blowing out the lantern's flame. In that moment of darkness, he caught the faint scent of smoke and something else. Something metallic, like blood mixed with rain. The fire flickered violently, then dimmed. Outside, the mist thickened, wrapping the porch in shadow. The woman's voice broke the silence, trembling and raw. "That's the night it happened," she said, eyes locked on the doorway. "The night everything changed." The traveler turned toward her, his pulse pounding. "What happened?" She didn't answer. Instead, she clutched her daughter closer, staring at the open door as if expecting someone or something to step through. The night grew still again, too still, and in that breathless quiet he felt it, the weight of something unseen watching them. The storm had passed, but something far worse had just arrived. The door stood open, the wind whistling through it like a warning from another world. The traveler stared into the dark, unsure whether to step forward or close it. The woman didn't move. Her face was pale, her eyes fixed on something beyond what he could see. The child stirred, whispering in her sleep, and that seemed to pull the woman back to the present. She rushed to the door, slammed it shut, and bolted it tight. The sound echoed through the small house like a gunshot, then silence. Even the rain had stopped. He watched her from the firelight. Her hands trembled slightly as she drew the latch bar across. "Who do you think it was?" he asked, his voice low. She didn't answer right away. "It happens every year around this time," she finally said. "Always the same night, always the same sound. A knock, sometimes a whisper. I used to think it was my imagination, but..." She trailed off, her eyes darting to the window again. He waited, the heat from the fire warming his back. "But what?" She shook her head slowly. "The year after my husband passed, I heard the same knock. When I opened the door that night, no one was there. But I found his boots on the porch. Muddy. The ones I buried him in." Her words hung in the air, heavy and cold. The traveler leaned forward, his fingers tightening around his knee. He wasn't a man easily frightened, but something in her voice sent a chill down his spine. He glanced toward the window. The mist outside had grown thicker, clinging to the glass like smoke. She sank into the wooden chair by the fire, pulling the shawl closer around her shoulders. "I've tried to leave this place before," she whispered. "But every time I do, something pulls me back. Once I reached the town line and the wagon wheel broke clean in half. Another time my daughter fell ill before we got past the ridge. The land doesn't let us go." He studied her face, the exhaustion, the quiet terror, the deep loneliness hiding behind every word. "Maybe it's just bad luck," he said, though his tone betrayed doubt. "Maybe," she murmured. "Or maybe it's him," the traveler frowned. "Your husband?" She nodded. "He was a good man once, hard-working, kind. But the fever changed him before it took him. He used to walk out to the barn at night, talking to someone who wasn't there. I thought it was the sickness. But the night he died, I found our lantern swinging from the rafters, burning low, and the horses trembling like they'd seen a ghost. She stared into the fire, her voice distant now. I buried him myself. The ground was frozen. I thought it was over. But the knocking started that next winter. The traveler said nothing. His eyes flicked to the small girl asleep near the hearth, her breathing slow and even. She looked peaceful, untouched by the darkness that clung to her mother's words. But the man could feel something else. A weight in the room that wasn't just grief. He stood and paced slowly, his boots creaking on the floorboards. You said it happens every year, he said. And tonight's that night? She nodded once. He exhaled, the firelight flickering against his rough features. Then maybe I should keep watch, just in case it's not, whatever you think it is. Her gaze lifted toward him, uncertain but grateful. You'd do that? He gave a faint nod. Wouldn't sit right to leave you here alone. Outside, the wind had gone still, but the night carried a strange hum, as if the earth itself was holding its breath. The traveler took his coat from the peg and stepped to the window, peering into the dark. The mist had thinned slightly, revealing the shape of the barn in the distance. It stood crooked against the horizon, its roof sagging, its doors half open. A faint glimmer of light moved inside, slow, steady, like a lantern swinging from a hand. He froze. There's someone out there, he said. The woman turned sharply. Where? He pointed. In the barn. You said it's been empty? Her face drained of color. It should be. Without another word, he unlatched the door and stepped into the night. The ground squelched beneath his boots, wet and uneven. The cold air stung his face, and the faint glow from the barn flickered like a dying candle. Behind him, the door creaked open again, and he heard her whisper, Be careful. He approached slowly, each step louder than it should have been. When he reached the barn, the door groaned as he pushed it aside. The smell of hay and damp wood filled the air. The lantern's glow came from the far corner, but when he stepped inside, there was no one there. Just an old lamp hanging from a nail, burning weakly. The horses were gone. The stalls empty. He turned, scanning the shadows. Anyone here? He called softly, no answer. Just the faint sound of water dripping from the roof. He took another step and something crunched under his boot. He looked down. It was a small, rusted horseshoe half buried in straw. He crouched to pick it up, and that's when he saw the footprint beside it. Fresh. He followed it toward the back of the barn, where the boards had warped open slightly. Cold air seeped through the gaps. Beyond them, the field stretched out under the moonlight, and something moved along its edge. Something tall, walking slow, dragging one leg behind the other. He stepped back, his pulse quickening. The shape vanished into the mist. When he returned to the house, his expression was hard to read. She met him at the door, her face pale with worry. Did you see him? She whispered. I saw someone, he said quietly. Could have been a man, could have been something else. You ever tell anyone about this? No one would listen, she said. They think I'm mad. Some of the neighbors won't even come near. The pastor stopped visiting months ago. Said the land's cursed. He sank into the chair, the firelight catching the dampness on his coat. Maybe he's right, he muttered, her eyes glistened. Do you believe in curses? He looked at her, then at the sleeping girl. I believe in pain that doesn't die easy, he said. And I've seen men do worse things in grief than ghosts ever could. She studied him carefully. You've lost someone too, haven't you? He hesitated, then nodded. My wife. Fever took her, same as your husband. The doctors couldn't save her. I buried her myself under a cottonwood tree back home. Couldn't stand to stay after that. The woman's voice softened. That's why you're wandering. Guess so, he said. Some days I tell myself I'm searching for peace. Other days, I think I'm just running from the grave. Their eyes met in the glow of the fire. Two souls broken by loss, bound by silence and storm. Outside, the mist drifted past the window, and somewhere far off, a coyote howled. Then the child stirred again, murmuring something in her sleep. The woman rushed to her side. The little girl's lips trembled. Mama, he's cold, she whispered. The woman froze. Who's cold, baby? The child's eyes fluttered open, distant, unfocused. The man in the barn. A silence heavier than the storm itself filled the room. The traveler rose slowly, his eyes locked on the child. Did you see him? He asked gently. She nodded faintly. He's standing by the fence. He's waiting. The woman's breath caught. She pulled the child close, whispering prayers under her breath. The traveler turned to the window again. Nothing moved outside, just the pale glow of the moon over the wet ground. Yet the sense of being watched grew stronger with every second. He stepped back from the window, the floor creaking beneath him. "Whatever's happening," he said, his voice low, "it ain't finished tonight." The woman looked up, her eyes wide, her hands trembling as she held her daughter tight. "It never is," she whispered. "It always begins this way." The fire crackled once, then dimmed. The lantern flickered weakly, shadows stretching across the walls like reaching hands. And somewhere beyond the door in the cold night air came the faint sound of footsteps in the mud, slow, dragging, deliberate, heading toward the house. The footsteps outside dragged closer, slow and uneven like something half alive. Each step pressed deeper into the wet ground, leaving behind the muffled sound of boots sinking in mud. The traveler moved toward the window, but the glass had fogged from the heat inside. He rubbed it clear with his sleeve and peered into the night. The mist hung thick, but he could still make out the faint outline of a figure near the fence line. It didn't move now. It only stood there, still as stone, facing the house. The woman held her daughter tight against her chest, whispering softly, trying not to let the fear show in her voice. "He shouldn't be here," she said, her eyes darting toward the door. "Not again. Who is he?" the traveler asked. She didn't answer. The silence between them was heavier than before, stretching until the sound of the wind whistling through the cracks filled it. The traveler turned back to the door and reached for the latch. "Don't," she cried, her voice trembling. "Please don't open it." He looked at her. "If it's just a man, I can handle it." Her face tightened. "You don't understand. It's never just a man." Something in the way she said it made him pause. The little girl whimpered softly, clutching her mother's shawl. The fire burned low, casting long shadows across the floor, and the smell of smoke mixed with the damp scent from outside. The traveler took a slow breath and backed away from the door. Minutes passed, but it felt like hours. The figure didn't move. The woman finally rose, set her daughter down near the fire, and walked toward the shelf. She reached behind a row of jars and pulled out a small metal box. When she opened it, there was a single silver cross inside, dull with age, and a piece of folded paper tied with twine. She held the paper out to him. "This was found the morning after my husband's burial," she said quietly. He hesitated before taking it. The note was worn, the ink smudged, but he could still read the words. "You promised you'd wait." "I'm still waiting." He looked up sharply. "You think he wrote this?" "I know he did," she said. But his body was already in the ground when it was found. The earth hadn't even settled. He stared at her, unsure what to say. The fire cracked behind them, throwing sparks into the air. Outside, a low creaking sound came from the barn like wood shifting under weight. He folded the note carefully and handed it back. "Has anyone else seen him?" She shook her head. "No one believes me. They think I'm losing my mind." The traveler studied her closely. Her voice carried no madness, only exhaustion, the kind that comes when grief stretches too long. "What about the girl?" he asked softly. "Has she seen him before?" The woman hesitated. "Sometimes she talks to him," she said. "She sits by the window and whispers things. I ask her who she's speaking to, and she says, 'The man who watches the barn.'" The child stirred again as if hearing them, her small voice breaking through the silence. "He says he's hungry." The woman froze. "Don't talk to him, baby," she said quickly. "Don't ever answer him." The traveler's heartbeat quickened. "You said he comes back every year. Why?" Her eyes glistened in the dim light. "Because of what I did," she whispered. "Or maybe because of what I didn't do." He waited, but she didn't continue. Her shoulders trembled slightly as she looked toward the door again. "The last winter before he died, there was a fire in the barn. We lost one of the horses. He said he saw someone out there that night, someone walking between the trees whispering his name. He went out with a lantern and came back before dawn, his clothes burned, his hands shaking. After that, he changed. He stopped talking to me, stopped eating. He said there were voices in the walls calling him." She turned toward the traveler. "When he died, I thought the fever had taken his mind. But maybe it wasn't the fever at all." He rubbed a hand over his face, thinking. "Could have been someone playing tricks. Bandits or drifters sometimes use fear to drive folks off land they want." "I'd believe that," she said, "if the land was worth anything. But no one's wanted this place in years." The fire crackled again, a faint gust slipping through the window pane. The traveler rose and walked toward the door. "I'll take a look around," he said. She reached for his sleeve. "Please don't go far. He gave a reassuring nod and stepped out into the night. The cold air hit hard, carrying the scent of rain and smoke. The mist had lifted slightly, enough for him to see the barn clearly now. He moved slowly, boots sinking into soft mud. The lantern in the barn was still lit, swinging gently from its nail, though there was no wind to move it. When he reached the fence, he saw footprints again, bigger than before, deep and fresh. He knelt down and touched the edge of one. The soil was still warm, like someone had just stepped there. He followed the trail around the barn, where it disappeared near a pile of old boards. Something glimmered faintly beneath them. He knelt and brushed away the debris until he found a rusted locket, half buried in the mud. Inside was a faded photograph of the woman, younger, smiling beside a man with a strong jaw and tired eyes. He closed it carefully and slipped it into his pocket. Then he heard it, a faint sob somewhere behind him. He spun around. Nothing but shadows. When he returned to the house, the woman was kneeling by the fire, whispering prayers under her breath. The girl sat near the door, staring blankly at the wall. "You shouldn't have gone out," the woman said, her voice sharp with fear. He placed the locket on the table. "Found this by the barn," he said. She looked at it and froze. "That was his," she whispered. "I buried it with him." A chill ran through him. He turned to the window again, half expecting to see the figure still standing there. But the fence was empty now. The mist had thinned into a silver haze across the fields. They sat in silence for a while. The fire burned lower, and the weight of the night settled heavy over them. The traveler leaned forward, elbows on his knees. "There's something I don't understand," he said. "You said he changed before he died. What did he say before the end?" She looked at him, her eyes dark and distant. "He said he'd never leave me hungry." The traveler frowned. "What does that mean?" She shook her head slowly. "I don't know. But the next morning, one of our hens was gone, then the dog. And one night, I woke up to find him standing over our daughter's crib, whispering that same thing, 'You'll never go hungry again.' I screamed, and he didn't even turn his head. It was like he wasn't really there anymore." The traveler sat back, the flickering fire reflecting in his eyes. He didn't believe in ghosts, but he believed in madness, and in guilt that could twist a soul beyond repair. Still, something about this didn't fit any explanation he knew. The footprints, the locket, the cold wind that came and went with no pattern. It felt wrong, like the land itself was alive and watching. The little girl spoke again, her voice soft but clear. "Mama, he's at the window!" The woman gasped and turned, clutching the child. The traveler rose and looked, but there was only the reflection of the firelight. Yet in the faint glow, he could have sworn he saw a handprint appear on the outside of the glass, large, wet, and fading fast. He grabbed the poker from the fireplace and moved to the door. "If it's a man, I'll find him," he said, though his voice carried doubt now. The woman reached for him, her voice desperate. "If you go out there, he'll follow you back." "That's how it starts." He hesitated, her words echoing in his mind. "Then what do we do?" "Wait till dawn," she whispered. "He never comes past sunrise." He looked back at her, then at the window where the mist pressed close again. Outside, the wind had shifted, carrying faint whispers that almost sounded like words, soft, distant, calling from the fields. He sat back down by the fire, never taking his eyes off the door. The night stretched long and restless. Every creak of the floor, every sigh of the wind made the air tighter. The woman held her daughter close, whispering prayers until her voice trembled into silence. The traveler's thoughts drifted to his wife again, to the grave he'd left behind, and the nights he'd sworn he heard her voice in the wind. Maybe grief played tricks on all of them, or maybe, he thought grimly, the dead truly never left when love and guilt chained them to the living. Outside, somewhere near the barn, the lantern's light went out. The mist swallowed everything, and before the fire could burn itself to ash, there came a faint knock at the door again, soft, steady, patient, the same knock as before, the one that never really stopped. The knocking came again, slow, steady, and deliberate. Each strike echoed through the small wooden house as if it were hitting the traveler's own chest. The woman clutched her daughter close, her knuckles white, her breathing uneven. The fire had burned low, and the only light came from its fading orange glow that trembled on the walls. The traveler stared at the door, his jaw tight, every instinct urging him to move but every shadow whispering to stay still. The knock came a third time, louder now, more impatient. and the child whimpered softly against her mother's arm. He rose quietly, taking the fire poker in his hand. The wood under his boots creaked as he moved toward the door. The woman's voice trembled through the silence. "Don't open it, please." "Not tonight." He didn't answer. He placed his ear to the door. On the other side, he heard breathing, slow, uneven, and close. Whoever or whatever stood there wasn't trying to hide. It was waiting. He could almost feel the cold radiating through the wood. Then came a whisper, so faint it might have been the wind. "You promised." The traveler stepped back, his face pale in the dim light. The woman buried her face into her child's hair. The words had been the same as in the note, the same handwriting, the same message written across the page he'd held in his hand. The traveler turned toward her. "It spoke," he said quietly. She nodded without looking up. "He always does. And when you answer, he comes inside." He felt the air thicken around them as if the house itself was holding its breath. The fire flickered once, then dimmed to a dull glow. Outside, the wind picked up, rattling the loose boards on the walls. The knocking stopped, but the silence that followed was worse. The kind of silence that hides behind it something waiting to happen. The traveler moved to the window again, careful not to make a sound. Through the mist he saw movement, something shifting near the barn. A faint light glowed again, faintly swinging like a lantern being carried. He narrowed his eyes, trying to focus. The shape was there, tall, broad-shouldered, dragging one leg slightly as it moved toward the house. He turned sharply. "It's coming this way." The woman clutched her daughter tighter. "He always does." "Then why stay here?" he asked, frustration breaking through his whisper. "Because running doesn't help," she said. "I've tried. He follows wherever we go. This land, this house, it's where it began. It's where it ends." The child looked up suddenly, her eyes unfocused as if she were listening to something no one else could hear. "Mama, he says he's at the door again." The woman's breath hitched. The traveler turned, every muscle tense. The knock came once more, louder than before. 3 slow beats, then silence. He gripped the poker tighter, his heart pounding. "If it's flesh and bone, I'll deal with it," he muttered. The woman's voice cracked. "You can't fight what's already gone." He ignored her and stepped forward. The firelight danced across his back as he reached for the latch. The woman's whisper broke through the air like a plea to God. "If you open that door, he won't stop until he takes one of us." He froze. Her words hung heavy in the dark. His hand hovered over the latch. The knocking didn't come again, but the sound of something brushing against the window made him turn. A pale outline of a hand pressed against the glass, leaving a trail of condensation as it slid down. The child whimpered again, whispering, "He's cold, Mama. So cold." The traveler backed away from the door, moving closer to the fire. His mind raced. He'd seen death, he'd seen madness, but nothing like this. He felt trapped between belief and reason, unable to tell where one ended and the other began. The woman stood, trembling, and reached for the cross on the table. She clutched it tightly and whispered, "Please, just let the night pass." The wind howled louder now, pushing through the cracks in the wall, and the sound of something scraping against the boards grew clearer. It circled the house slowly, dragging along the outside like fingernails over old wood. The traveler could hear it move from one wall to the next, steady and patient. He turned to the woman. "There's something real out there," he said, his voice low but firm. "I know," she replied. "I've lived with it for 2 winters now. It's real enough to take, but not real enough to kill." He swallowed hard. "You think it wants you?" Her gaze shifted to the little girl. "No," she whispered. "It wants her." The traveler stared, stunned. "The child?" "He always said he'd take care of us," she said, her voice barely audible. "That we'd never go hungry again. When he started talking to the shadows in the barn, I thought it was the fever. But he made promises to things that shouldn't listen. And when he died, something took his place." The wind slammed against the door. The fire guttered. Dust fell from the rafters. The woman pulled the girl into her arms and fell to her knees, whispering prayers in a trembling voice. The traveler turned to the window again. Through the fog, the figure stood right outside the door now. Its face was half shadowed by the lantern light, but its features seemed wrong, twisted, half rotted, as if carved out of old memories instead of flesh. The lantern it held swayed, dripping water with each step it took closer. The traveler's breath caught. His instinct screamed to fight, but fear rooted him in place. The figure stopped right in front of the door. Then came the sound of a familiar voice, deep and broken, calling softly from outside. "Let me in." "She's hungry." The woman's body shook, tears streaming down her face. "He says that every year," she whispered. "The first year I thought he meant me. The second I knew he meant her," the traveler stepped forward, heart hammering. "You can't let him take her." Her voice was hollow. "If I don't, he'll never stop coming." The words hit him hard. The fire crackled once more, and in the dim light he saw her hand tremble toward the latch. "Don't," he said sharply. She looked at him, eyes filled with despair. "You don't know what it's like to live every night waiting for the same knock." "I know loss," he said quietly. "But what's standing out there isn't what you lost." For a moment their eyes met in understanding, the kind that passes between two souls who have both buried love and lived long enough to regret it. Then the sound outside changed. It wasn't knocking anymore. It was whispering, voices, dozens of them. Men, women, and children. Soft and hollow, weaving through each other in a terrible chorus that filled the air. The traveler felt his stomach twist as he realized the sound wasn't outside anymore. It was coming from the walls. The house groaned, the boards bending as if under weight. The air turned colder, the flame shrinking to a dying glow. He reached for the poker again, ready to strike at anything that moved. The whispers grew louder, clearer, until he could make out the words. "Let me in, please. I'm still waiting." The woman clutched her daughter tighter, sobbing now. "They're all the ones who never left this place," she cried. He wasn't the first. The traveler felt a rush of dread. "What do you mean?" "This land was a burial ground before it was a homestead," she said. "He found bones when he built the barn. He laughed and said they were just rocks. But he disturbed something that doesn't rest." The walls shook violently, a loud crack splitting one of the beams above. The child screamed, and the traveler pulled them both toward the center of the room. Dust and splinters rained down. The lantern fell from its hook, shattering on the floor, flames licking across the boards. The fire spread fast, smoke curling up the walls. The woman coughed, holding the girl close as the traveler tried to smother the flames with a blanket. Through the smoke, he saw the door creak open by itself. Cold air poured in. The figure stood there, motionless, framed by the firelight. Its face, what was left of it, was turned toward the child. And though the heat roared, the traveler felt nothing but ice in his chest. He reached for his coat, pulling the revolver he'd thought empty from its pocket. He aimed it at the doorway, his voice rough. "Stay back." The figure stepped closer, dragging one foot through the burning floorboards. The woman screamed. The traveler fired. The sound exploded through the room, but the figure didn't fall. The bullet tore through it like smoke. The creature kept moving, slower now, reaching out one charred hand toward the girl. The traveler grabbed the child, pulling her toward the back door. The woman stumbled after them, choking on smoke. The fire blazed behind them, filling the house with crackling light. When they burst outside, the night was alive with sound, whispers, wind, and the faint cry of something not human. The woman fell to her knees in the yard, clutching her daughter, her face streaked with soot and tears. The traveler turned back toward the burning house. For a moment through the fire he thought he saw it, standing in the doorway, unmoving, watching. Its face seemed to flicker between man and shadow, and then it was gone in the smoke. The traveler turned back to the woman. "It's not over," he said, his voice shaking. She looked up at him, her voice breaking. "It never is. It just waits for the next night." The barn behind them creaked in the wind, its door swinging open on its own. Inside, a faint light flickered again, the same lantern burning where no hand had placed it. And from within the darkness came a single sound, the slow, dragging step of something returning to where it began. The wind carried the smell of smoke long after the fire had died. The first pale light of dawn crept over the horizon, touching the burned shell of the house with a soft golden glow. The woman sat in the yard, her arms wrapped around her daughter, staring at what was left of her home. The traveler stood a few paces away, his coat torn, his face darkened by soot. Neither had spoken since the fire went out. The air was heavy with the silence that comes after survival, the kind that makes you question what you've just lived through. The child was the first to move. She lifted her head, eyes red but calm, and looked toward the barn. "He's gone now," she said softly. The traveler followed her gaze. The barn stood untouched, the door slightly open, the lantern no longer burning. For the first time in hours, the mist was gone. The land looked ordinary again, muddy, quiet, harmless. But the traveler knew better. He could still feel the weight of what had been there, the kind of presence that doesn't leave even when it's gone. He walked toward the ruins of the house, the ground crunching under his boots. The fire had eaten almost everything, walls blackened, roof caved in. Yet near the hearth, half buried in ashes, something glinted faintly. He bent down and brushed the soot away. It was the silver cross the woman had held the night before, blackened but still whole. He picked it up and turned it in his hand, the metal cold despite the heat that had passed. He turned to her. "You'll need a new start," he said quietly. She looked up, eyes tired but steady. "There's nowhere left to go." "There's always somewhere," he said. "Town's half a day's ride. I'll take you there. You can start over." Her eyes moved from him to the smoking ruins, and for a moment he saw the struggle inside her. "I buried him here," she said softly. "If I leave, it'll be like leaving him twice." The traveler walked closer, his boots sinking into the wet soil. "You can't stay where the dead won't rest," he said. "He doesn't belong here anymore, and neither do you." The child tugged at her mother's sleeve. "Mama," she whispered. "He said thank you." The woman froze. "What did you say?" "He said thank you," the girl repeated. Then he went away. The traveler looked at the child, then at the woman. The morning wind stirred the ashes behind them, carrying the faint smell of cedar and smoke. The woman's shoulders shook, and for the first time she wept, not from fear but from release. The traveler let her cry, standing quietly beside her. There was nothing to say that would make sense of the night they'd lived through. Some things didn't need understanding. They only needed to end. By the time the sun had risen high enough to warm the valley, the traveler had gathered his horse and found a spare blanket to wrap around the girl. He helped the woman onto the saddle and walked beside them down the dirt road. The fields on either side were quiet, the grass glistening with dew. Birds sang again in the distance, cautious at first, then louder. The world was slowly returning to itself. As they reached the ridge, the woman turned to look back one last time. Smoke still curled upward from the place that had been her home. "Do you think he's really gone?" she asked. The traveler squinted toward the horizon. "Maybe not gone," he said. "Maybe just done." They walked on without speaking. The sound of the horse's hooves was steady and sure. The girl soon fell asleep against her mother's shoulder, her small hand clutching the edge of the blanket. The woman's face softened, the lines of fear easing for the first time. The traveler kept glancing at her, seeing the quiet strength that had carried her through the night. By afternoon, they reached the outskirts of the town. It was small. A few wooden buildings, a church steeple, a blacksmith shop, and a general store. Smoke rose from chimneys, and the scent of baking bread drifted through the air, ordinary life untouched by ghosts. The woman looked around like she was seeing the world again for the first time. "It feels different," she said. "It should," the traveler replied. "This place doesn't remember what you've been through." They found a small cabin on the edge of town, abandoned but sturdy. The traveler helped her set a fire in the hearth and left a few supplies from his satchel: flour, jerky, a tin of coffee. She tried to protest, but he stopped her. "You'll need it more than I do," he said. When she finally smiled, it was faint but real. "You could stay," she said after a long pause. "You don't look like a man with anywhere to go." He thought about it for a moment. The offer hung in the quiet room, warm and heavy with meaning. He looked at her, then at the child sleeping near the fire. "If I stay," he said, "I'll just bring my ghosts with me." "Maybe we all already have them," she replied softly. "But maybe some ghosts don't want us to be alone." The traveler didn't answer. He stepped outside, the wind catching the edge of his coat. The sun was sinking low again, painting the sky with streaks of orange and gold. He stood there a long time, watching the light fade over the valley. The fields looked peaceful now, the smoke from the ruins long gone. Somewhere in the distance he thought he heard the faint creak of the barn door, but when he turned to listen, there was only the rustle of grass and the sound of the river. That night, he sat by the campfire outside the cabin, staring into the flames. The woman came to the doorway, her shawl drawn tight around her shoulders. "You don't have to leave tonight," she said quietly. He looked up at her, then back at the fire. "I should," he said. "Storms like that don't come twice, but I reckon I've stayed through enough of them." She nodded slowly, understanding what he meant. "Thank you," she said. "For saving us." He shook his head. "You saved yourself. I just happened to be here when it happened." The fire crackled softly between them. After a moment, she went back inside, leaving the door open just a little. The traveler sat there until the stars came out, the night calm and still. When he finally rose to leave, he looked once more toward the east, where the burnt homestead lay somewhere beyond the ridge. For a moment he thought he saw a flicker of light there, a single lantern swaying in the distance. Then it faded into the dark. He mounted his horse and rode toward the open plain. The wind followed him, gentle now, carrying with it the faintest echo of a man's voice, distant and calm, whispering what might have been gratitude or farewell. By morning, the valley was quiet again. The woman and her daughter woke to a world that smelled of ash and promise. The little girl stood at the window, watching the sunrise. "He's really gone now," she said. Her mother nodded, brushing the hair from her daughter's face. "Yes," she said softly, "he's gone." But when she stepped outside later, she found the silver cross lying in the grass by the porch, clean now, shining in the sunlight as if it had never touched fire. She picked it up and held it close, whispering a single prayer of thanks. Not for what she'd lost, but for what she still had. The traveler was already miles away, a lone figure on the empty road, moving toward another horizon, another forgotten town. Behind him, the land grew quiet, as though it too could finally rest. That night, the wind passed gently through the valley where the house once stood, rustling the tall grass. And for the first time in years, no knocking came from the door, no whispering from the walls, only silence and peace. Some said the land was cursed, others said it had been freed. But those who passed by in the years after spoke of a feeling there, a strange calm, like the place itself had forgiven something long overdue. And though the woman never spoke of that night again, she kept the cross above her new hearth and taught her daughter to pray for the restless souls who had once called the valley home. And sometimes, when the wind blew soft through the trees, carrying the scent of rain and cedar, she would close her eyes and remember the man who came through the storm, a stranger who stopped to help, who never asked for anything, and who left behind more peace than he took. The road out of that valley never grew new grass where his boots had fallen, and though no one saw him again, the people in town would sometimes say that on nights when the rain came hard, you could see a lone rider passing through the mist, never stopping, never staying, just a shadow moving through a world that had finally learned how to let go.